Hello, this is Dale Matthews. This is Inside News, and Mike will be joining us again next week. You may have seen the show where I'd played back a clip from Tuesday in the little back room where Treasurer Eve Arce was explaining to the commissioners how she, for the county, is going to be handling drug money, is going to be handling marijuana money, because here pretty soon the county is going to claim that it's doing something to earn its 3% taxes. I don't know what they're going to claim that they're doing, but I do know, let's see, looking at the calendar, that coming up here soon, there'll be next Thursday at noon, there's going to be a meeting of the local public safety coordinating council, and they're going to Lipsick, and they're going to talk about, apparently for the very first time, what to do with the money that comes in from the 3% marijuana tax. Yes, one of the things that the commissioners said on Tuesday is they have no idea how they're going to spend the money. They know they want to tax you or tax marijuana retailing, but they don't know what they're going to do with the money. They also don't know, or at least haven't identified, what it is they're doing to earn the money, but they definitely do want to get that tax. And one of the things that Eve Arce said, and I posted it here as a separate video at badcounty.com, where you can go up and click in the upper left-hand corner and see the video, is she said that that money that's collected in cash by her office, that you're just going to have to overlook the fact that it comes in from activities that are declared by the federal government to be illegal. It's going to be overlooked. And once the county receives the cash, and only cash now, the county is going to put it in a bank and, quote, it gets laundered by the county in that way. It gets laundered. So I called a couple of TV stations after we played the video, of course, and told them about that. And they, wow, she said laundered? I said, yes, she did. I said, are you interested in the footage? Well, that's a really interesting story. Yes. And we're happy to provide the footage to you for free, as we always do. Are you interested in the footage? Well, it is an interesting story. Yes. No, I really don't think their editors here would be interested in running such a story. Right. Now, of course, the Courier is not going to cover this story. You're not going to see it in any other place either, except for us. So what I did was, since it was yesterday, it was the first day of the month, I said, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll write a letter to the editor of the Courier. And it turns out the number, I transcribed the entire thing, as you probably know. If you click on this, you can listen to it. But I transcribed all of it down to every and to make absolutely sure that we heard it, that you're hearing it, that I've heard it 100% correctly. And as it turns out, the number of words there are almost exactly equal to the number of words you can put into a letter to the editor. I think it's 250. This was 248. And so I submitted that, as I always do whenever I submit a letter to the editor, was not that often. I always say, and if you want to corroborate what this says, here's where to go. It's a non-commercial website. I got a letter this time back from Kevin Wittison pretty quickly. He's the editor of the Courier, saying they're not going to print this letter to the editor. Well, they're certainly not going to be following through on this story. They're not going to print it because I included the part that says where you can corroborate this. And if I want to buy an ad, I can just buy an ad, as if I'm going to give them any money. Well, I shot back to him that it was rather ironic that a newspaper, which is commercial, is suggesting that a website, which is non-commercial, is trying to advertise itself. We don't have any advertising. We don't gather any money, unlike the Courier tries to do from you. I responded to him print the letter to the editor and be sure to include where people can go to click on it so they can see for sure that that's what it said. And the other thing that you can do is you can go to Facebook, because I posted it on Facebook. You don't have to go to our website to see it, and you can click on the video there. And yeah, I mean, it clicks as a view, but it doesn't, mean anything as far as this website goes. And even if this website has 1 million hits a day, it doesn't mean anything to me or to Mike because there's no money involved with it. Yeah, Kevin Whittison, they're at the Courier, they're scrambling to try to figure out how they can deny this story, which is part of the county record, from being in the newspaper or shared with anybody. We can't get anything done at all in this county if we're not informed. And if the Courier's forming a block against even a letter to the editor, they're not going to cover this as a story because they don't want this story to get out. So if they're going to also make it so that you can't put a letter to the editor, they might as well be the IV News. Really, when you think about it. So that's lovely. You may recall that somebody had written in a letter to the editor of the IV News, that'd be Dan Mancuso, saying good things about this show. And so I'm not going to run this as saying good things about this show. That's nice. That's the current state of media in our area. And don't get me started about K-Joe. Stop it. Stop it. Okay, so here's the message over my shoulder, and if you're listening just to the audio, it says, another attempt at budget clarity is voted down by budget committee. What does that mean? Well, you can be sure that it centers around the continuing efforts by Peggy Goodwin to try to get something out there so that people can understand how the money is being spent by the budget committee. And you already know what the answer is going to be. I don't even have to do a show about this. The budget committee says, no, we're not going to allow that, right? And what she's saying is that we've got this money that has come in to the county from several sources, but the latest one was the windfall that they got. They hadn't anticipated the money coming in. The point is, if they hadn't anticipated the money coming in from timber receipts, how can they be sure that's a one-time deal? Because they didn't think it was coming in at all. And maybe it's going to happen again and again and again. And she said at a previous budget meeting, you may recall this, I'd like to discuss that. And Simon Hare was the main person that said, we're going to postpone that to another meeting. And this was the one you're going to see is the final budget meeting of the budget committee. And past this point, then the county commissioners get to pick and choose which ones they want to do. This is the budget committee making recommendations. And they said, well, Simon said, and the others agreed that they were going to talk about this. So here is Margaret Goodwin's attempt to talk about this. Margaret.
Generally accepted accounting principles prescribe that a fund, money from a source that can only be used for one purpose, must be accounted for separately from money from a source that can be used for multiple purposes. At this point, we have money from the fuel tax distributions that can only be used for roads, and we have money from Title I payments that can be used for either roads or sheriff's patrols. So up until 2012, this was not an issue because money from both sources was exclusively dedicated to roads. But when HB 4175 passed in 2012 and gave us the option to use the Title I payments for sheriff's patrols, at that point, it would have been compliant with generally accepted accounting principles to establish a new general ledger account to track the Title I payments. Now, that was not done, and because that wasn't done, last year, when the question came up of how much money is actually available from the Title I payments we've received in the past to be used for sheriff's patrols, there was no way to determine the answer from the books because those funds had been commingled. Now, we knew how much money had come in the Title I payments, but we did not know how much had been spent because the funds were commingled with the fuel tax distribution funds.
Now, this may seem a little boring to a couple of you. I know who you are. The thing is that once they commingle the funds, you have no way to keep track of them. Now you don't know which came from which and which could be applied to whichever. You have no idea. And you'll be able to see here in this video that the commissioners and the other handpicked members of the budget committee, they don't want any more clarity about this. What, are you kidding me? Because if you put this in a separate account, that's still going to go exactly where it's supposed to, where they've been saying they want it to go to. Not maybe where it's supposed to, but where they've decided that you can't do that, because that would then stick out by like a sore thumb. And somebody at some time in the future, not this budget committee, because this is done. I mean, we knew it was rubber stamped on the first day of their meeting. Okay, and it's too late to be introducing, as you could see from her record with them. They're not taking any of her ideas. Absolutely zero, none. We will not be giving that money to the sheriff's department, and even the sheriff didn't ask for it. In fact, what happened to the whole idea of saying the word emergency? Remember when there was something having to do with arsenic in the water, and suddenly everyone stopped talking about arsenic? Gee, that's a pretty knee-jerk reaction word. They just stopped saying it. Well, they've also stopped saying emergency. Nobody says anything about emergency except for us. Hey, what happened to the emergency? Silence. Hey, what about the emergency? Crickets in the corner. They don't talk about the emergency anymore. So what she's saying is, why don't we... Not that let's take that money and give it to the sheriff, which she had suggested before, and they shot down. She's saying, can we at least keep track of it separately? You already know the answer. They do not want to keep track of it separately, even though it will still go to the place they want it to go, because we'll all know how it's spent. And that's transparency in the budget, and we can't have that.
So at that point, the only thing we could say for certain was that the money that had been received in Title I payments in the prior year was still available, and that was $500,000. Since that point, we received another $1 million in Title I payments, and as Mr. O'Hare pointed out at our last meeting, those funds are still available because the balance in the Roads and Bridges Reserve Fund is over $1 million more than it was last year, so those funds have not been spent. I believe at our last meeting, Mr. Welch asked if there was any need to establish this fund now rather than waiting a year. And the reason for doing it now is that right now we do have a baseline figure. We know that there are $1.5 million of Title I payments that exist in our budget. And if we wait another year and those funds continue to be commingled, and should the combined balance in roads and bridges and public works decrease as it's projected to, then at that point in a year, we will again be in the position of having no way of knowing how much money is still available from the Title I payments.
Now, they've been saying now, all the way through the budget process, well, can't we wait on this? As she pointed out, Welch said, hey, we could wait on this. Well, we don't need to do this now. Okay, we can do this some other year. It's not necessary to do it at this meeting. Let's do it at another meeting. Well, no, we don't have room for it at this meeting. Let's do it at another meeting. So what could possibly be the reason? I mean, aside from just kicking the can down the road or trying to avoid this thing, the other reason behind it is she just said to you, because once those funds become inextricably commingled, that's those two words you don't hear very often. Now I can't say it. Inextricably commingled. Once they become that, there's no way of telling which dollar is which. Yes, of course, that's the plan.
Could potentially be allocated to sheriff's patrols because the funds are commingled and we won't know how much of that money has been spent. So at this point, we do actually have a baseline with which to establish that fund and bring ourselves into compliance with generally accepted accounting principles. And I would like to reiterate that establishing this separate general ledger account, it's a simple bookkeeping procedure. It does not allocate any money away from public works. It does not allocate any money to the sheriff's department. It simply creates an account in which we can track the balance of Title I payments so that we know from year to year how much of that money actually is available.
Now, why would the budget committee turn down a reasonably presented, generally accepted accounting principle? generally accepted accounting principle that's not going to make a hill of beans difference between where the money went. Why can they not do that? Because it would make it clear where the money came from and what it's not being spent on. It's generally accepted accounting principle, which will take nothing to do. But they can't accept that because it reminds us every time somebody looks at it, if they care to do so, that that money was not being spent in the way that the citizens are saying they would like it to. Oh, there's always the 20% that says, let's throw it down a drain or whatever, or let's stop funding the sheriff, right? And then you've got Arthur O'Hare, who's certainly willing to get up and saying, there are people who say there's no problem at all with anything. No, nobody said that. Okay. So no need to exaggerate on that. What she's saying is, why don't we just do a reasonable thing? This is super basic. We're not even going to spend the money that way this time, but can we please, keep these dollar bills apart from each other, still keeping them in the fund where that they are, but just putting them in a separate stack. Oh, no. We can't do that. No, of course not. The budget committee would have to vote to say, let's not follow generally accepted accounting principles.
Which gives the option for the commissioners, if the commissioners should decide to exercise that option in future years to use some of that money for sheriff's patrols, then we'll know how much money is available. If we don't do this, we again have no way of knowing. So back in 2012, when this account was not established, it was a simple and understandable oversight because it had never been necessary before. But at this point, once an oversight has come to light, we should make it right, and we should bring our books into compliance.
Now, once an oversight has been pointed out, 2 years ago, I pointed out at one of these meetings, I just generally stopped making speeches at these meetings. Why bother, really? I mean, it's important to be educated about this, but as far as thinking that they're going to do anything, I had pointed out that there's a state law that says, state law, oh no, not that. Oh, videotape, why would you look at videotape? That says that the budget committee members, especially the commissioners, cannot speak to each other about the budget except in a budget hearing during that time where the budget's being discussed. It's against the law. And I caught twice the county commissioners talking about details of the budget outside of a budget meeting. I pointed that out to the commissioners at the time and they just laughed. I went to a meeting of the budget committee and I said, what do you think about the idea right in front of these folks here? And some of them were there. Some of these same people were there. I said, how do you feel about the fact that 3 of your members, half of your members, have been breaking the law? This is a budget meeting. What do you think about that? This is the answer I got. They don't think anything about it. And when she's saying, here's a way to have generally accepted budget, accounting principles, these people are not going to listen to that. They're not going to try to present it in a way that we all know what's going on. It's the opposite of their goal.
Generally accepted accounting principles by establishing separate accounts for funds that can be used for different purposes.
So before I open it up for the committee for discussion, I need a motion to take from the table the previously tabled motion.
Yes, of course.
I move to take from the table the motion that was tabled before. And the motion is, I move that we establish a separate emergency reserve account for Title I road dollars, which can be used for either roads or sheriff's patrols pursuant to HB 4175, and which can only be used if there are no other funds available that could be used first.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Now the floor is open for discussion. Anyone choose to address this?
I'd like to have the finance director help me better understand what the implications might be, and is this an advantage to some way? Is it a hindrance in some way, and amplify either way?
Now you can see how important that the finance director, Arthur O'Hare, is to this process. These folks haven't a slightest idea of what they're going to say to it. They know they're going to say no. but they haven't any idea why they should say no or what the pluses and minuses are. So they call in the finance director to try to give us a bunch of reasons why this is absolutely impossible. Following generally accepted accounting principles at a budget meeting with the budget committee, that's not going to happen. And here's 11,000 reasons why.
I think the intent behind this is pretty straightforward. It's just to isolate the forest receipts so that there is no debate as to how much we have in forest receipts. The couching it in terms of generally accepted accounting principles, I think, was unnecessary, simply because, for example, our general fund gets money from a variety of sources and can be used for a variety of purposes. So there's not any kind of an accounting mandate that revenue that can be used for a variety of purposes has to be in a separate fund. But the intent, I think, is fairly straightforward. There's no real mystery on that. It's just the motion is to say how much have we received in those forest receipts and be very clear about what that number is. So as far as the accounting behind it is concerned, or the level of effort to create a new fund, or to, if the board instructs me to create a new fund, I'll create a new fund. If we want to deposit all forestry receipts in there, we'll deposit all forestry receipts in there. It's fairly straightforward. Yeah.
Okay, now Arthur O'Hare now has a problem because he's answered in a reasonable way. He's answered the same way that any of us would answer. Why? And we should be able to follow the budget. It's not true that the budget is so complex that nobody will understand it. It's just simply not true. It's our money, and we should be able to understand it. And it's the people in this room, it's their duty to explain it to us in a way that we can understand. I think you agree with that. So what the Arthur O'Hare just did is he's not reading from the script, Betty, because he's saying, well, yeah, we can do that. No, Arthur, that's not your instructions. You should be saying, no, that's absolutely impossible. Let's go.
Can I?
Yes, Mr. Welch.
Arthur, a couple of things. What I thought I heard you say before was that without a separate accounting, the two deposits, we don't lose their identity. I mean, we know what we received. It's being accounted for. It's in the road fund.
Right.
All right.
Correct.
My assumption was that in 17-18 fiscal year budgeting process, that if we knew those funds were there, and we all know they're there, a transfer of X amount of those funds to public safety would still be available without a singular accounting of having an account with the $1.5 million balance. Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct. Now it's correct. So look, you pour this bunch of water in with that bunch of water, and then later on, if you want to separate the molecules, why, that's easy to do. They're all in there. All you need to do is just reach in there and say, well, these came from, well, let's see, those have kind of moved over here. Well, these came, no, that's not quite, oh, don't worry. It's generally accepted accounting principles. Yeah, yeah. And Arthur O'Hare needed to be reminded about that this isn't necessary by this important new guy on the budget committee. Thank you.
Agree with that.
Secondly, that part of the wording of this proposal is that it would earmark those to be, quote unquote, sort of like the last dollars available, so that we would sort of identify other dollars as being spent first, if I am
Right.
reading that correct. And I think that's again sort of a policy issue not necessarily a budget issue. Would you?
Well, I agree, and I think what some of the basis of the discussion is that we do not have any kind of a policy that would establish the hierarchy of spending. There is recommended policy, at the government level that says we should have a hierarchy of spending, that we should spend the most restricted funds first and spend the least restricted funds last. Makes good sense. But we as a county have not adopted a policy such as that.
Now, this was what Margaret Goodwin said at an earlier meeting. Why don't we make it so that, and see if you agree with this, and if you totally disagree, send me an email. That's great. You know where to send the email. Let's spend money on must-haves first. Then we'll spend money on not nice to haves, but on must haves, absolutely required money first, and then not completely required money second. It would be it would be a should have, must have first, should have second, and nice to have third. And that is the hierarchy. Now, the commissioners are not willing, buddy, they are not willing to sign on to that kind of logic. Because what would that mean for them? It would mean that the core function of government supposedly is to keep us safe. And then it would seem as if they're required to, and we'd need a new sheriff too, to ask for money, to allocate the money for the must-haves, for the required. We don't have a sheriff that's even willing to ask for that. And we don't have a legal counsel that's willing to fight for that. And all we have is a few scattering of volunteers like me and Mike and others who are willing to say, hey, wait a minute, what are you doing here, you guys? And so we can try to go up against the government, hierarchy. But here you're hearing with one person asking him questions. Here's Arthur O'Hare kind of changing. Well, yeah, we could do that. Yeah, but well, maybe we shouldn't. We don't really have. Well, nobody's actually decided to be logical about. Oh, yeah, right. Thanks, Arthur.
And I think the argument is that in light of not having that, in order to ensure that we are setting aside, the forestry receipts, unquestionably, that we would put them in a separate fund. But
What?
I agree with the whole principle that, if we have $4 million in our public works operating fund and public works reserve fund combined, and we have received, $2 million in forestry funds over the last 2 years, then, we, as a policy, we can say those funds are forestry receipts and available for. So, and I think that's acceptable. I don't see that as being a problem.
Would
Is
it?
that a question?
Yeah. Would it really be necessary to have a fund or just an account?
Well, I think part of the issue we're looking at is really a 1 year question. If we were talking about setting aside funds for 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there might be a more of a urgency about establishing a separate accounting and a separate fund. We're really talking about next year. And the budget committee for next year could certainly address the issue by saying, Public Works, you've received this much. We need this much in order to maintain current level of service for Sheriff Patrol, which these funds are restricted to Sheriff Patrol. I just don't see that as being requiring us to set up a new fund.
Nobody said anything about requiring you to set up a new fund. It was a suggestion by Margaret Goodwin that this could be done, and it's not going to affect anything at all. But the problem is, it makes that money apparent to everybody. We would all understand what had happened. This thing about, it's just 1 year. It doesn't have to be just 1 year. If you had $1.5 million Would you spend it all in 1 year? Or might you decide to add on, let's say, 1 sheriff's deputy for 10 years? You could. 2 of them for 5 years. You could. Who says this is just 1 year? And before they even say it, let's get to the idea, well, that money just came in once. You didn't expect the money to come in. So how do you know, since you didn't expect in the first place, that that's not going to happen again? We don't know that it will, but it could. You have no idea because you weren't expecting it in the first place. Well, we can put it off, we'll put it off to yet another budget committee. Don't make any decisions now. And as you'll hear them say a little bit later, Simon, well, I don't want to tie the hands of future boards. You wouldn't, if you're not going to make any decisions, it never gives any guidance to anybody. Never. Well, we'll discuss that later. That's what they said last year. We'll discuss, do you remember? Margaret Goodwin brought up this stuff before. We all did. Well, let's not decide that now. We'll decide, and here we are, a year later, and we're not deciding it. Well, let's put it off for another year because we don't need to decide anything. Not if it's not in the script.
I think the accounting is there, the money is identified, the balance is in the ending fund balance, but it is a policy decision.
Thank you.
So from my perspective, I think that's one of the things you'll have at least 1, if not maybe 2, 3 members. You never know how many members of this budget committee won't be here next year. Really what the budget committee this year is tasked with is preparing a budget for this next fiscal year. And I try to look at that when I'm doing policies for the Board of Commissioners, that I'm not setting something up that I don't think is going to be, who knows what the future boards are going to do. All I can do.
Now, what are you supposed to do? Set a policy for last year? They are deciding the budget for next year. They're not deciding today's budget. They're deciding it for next year. So let's not make any policy decisions that would affect next year and next year's budget. This is nonsense. This is exactly what they're doing. And all the decisions that they make will be affecting next year. So what is he saying?
What I'm doing with the time I'm here. So that would be one consideration, that it's not a budget impact for this next fiscal year. And so it's a good policy.
Mr. Chair, I would like to clarify some of the points that I made because they were misunderstood, probably because it's sometimes difficult to make yourself clear. But a couple of the points that I made were not, I did not make clearly enough. First of all, we do know how much money went into the fund. The question is how much came out. When the balance is greater than it was last year, then we know that the money that went in previous years is still there. If the balance is less than the previous year, as was the case last year when we asked, we didn't know. We could not say how much money from Title I payments was still available because some of the money had been spent and the funds were commingled and there was no way to know.
I'm starting to get to the point where I believe that a sleeping Keith Hick is much more valuable than an awake Keith Hick.
Which monies were spent. So we said, okay, we're just going to say the money that was received within the last year is still available, and that's it. Nothing prior, because we couldn't tell. As far as the generally accepted accounting principles, it's not a question of for the general fund where money goes in for all kinds of multiple purposes. It's a question of that when some money is dedicated to one purpose, and when other money is either dedicated to another purpose or to multiple purposes, that generally accepted accounting principles do say that the money that is dedicated for one purpose should be accounted for separately than money that is dedicated to multiple purposes. And we do have here funds that are dedicated solely to roads and funds that are dedicated to multiple purposes, even though that's only 2 purposes. So I want to clarify those 2 things. The question of policy, the reason that I added that it would be the last resort funding when everything else is gone was because I didn't want to make it just something that could be used for sheriff's patrols just as, because it's there. I wanted to make sure that it was last resort. But I would be happy to amend that motion to remove that last clause about
Margaret, it's not going to make any difference.
Only being used when there are no other funds available. So I would like to amend that motion to simply remove that last part about no other funds being available.
And I'm okay with that. Okay. It's been amended to remove that portion of the motion. Can you restate the motion without the amendment,
Yes.
or with the amendment of removing?
I move that we establish a separate emergency reserve account for Title I road dollars, which can only be used for either roads or sheriff's patrols pursuant to HB 4175.
Okay, great. In the essence of time, I think I'm going to try to move this motion along, and we'll have a roll call vote if there's no other discussion on this.
Can I ask,
There's going to be very little discussion about this, just from the same guy.
one quick question?
Sure, Mr. Welch.
Talk quickly. Your point, I think, was that you lose the identity, but in this year, we had more than $1 million increase. Well, the 500,000 was received in the previous year, but yet you want to move the full $1.5 million.
That's because at the end of the previous year, we had 500,000 that was known to be available at that point. None of that money has been spent since then. Neither has the $1 million that was received since then. So it's all still available.
Great.
Nothing. Zero. No comments from the others. It's hardly worth even participating in this.
Please call the roll.
Yes.
No.
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 Yes. No. Motion fails. 2-4. Any other items for the fiscal year 2016-17 budget that were not already previously discussed? Mr. O'Hare, Ms. Goodwin.
Mr. Hare, Mr. Chair, excuse me. At our first budget meeting, the issue is raised of the discussion of budgeting for outcomes, which has been our budget policy for 10 years, which has now, we've now dropped apparently even the good intention of doing that in favor of status quo budgeting. And I realize there's probably not time to discuss that at this meeting. So I think that's a very important issue because budget policy has a profound impact on the effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability of government. So I would like to move that we schedule another budget meeting to hold that discussion. At the time that we were discussing it, we ran out of time. You said that this was an appropriate discussion and that we should talk about it. But there isn't time once again, so I would like to move that we schedule another meeting to hold that discussion.
Great. I would second that. It's been moved and seconded, open for discussion for a motion to have an additional budget meeting of this year's fiscal budget committee for Josephine County on the issue of budgeting for outcomes.
This is simply the most important issue of all the budget meetings. For what are we budgeting? Are we budgeting for outcomes? Are we budgeting for status quo? Why are we here?
Any other discussion? So my point on this has been that I think iterated by our budget officer that we have a stable budget. Budgeting for outcomes was done to produce the budget that we inherited this year when doing this budget. We've been doing it, like you said, for quite some time. I think the decisions that have been made have put us at a point where we're allocating 76% of the general funds where the discretionary elements of budgeting for outcomes would really come from. From my standpoint, until I'm forced to make some other kinds of decisions that are frankly going to be coming out of the criminal justice system, there isn't very much left in the discretionary portion of the budget for the discretionary funds we have to do that budgeting for outcomes exercise. It's pretty time consuming, and we've done it several times already. So from my perspective, you may not have done it, but I have done it.
But you haven't done it because you're not budgeting for outcomes. Budgeting for outcomes says this is what we want and this is how we budget it. And it's more closely tied in with the idea that Margaret Goodwin said, let's spend money on the must-haves first. And so Simon's saying, well, we've always done that. No, you haven't done that. You haven't done it for the entire time that you've been in office, Simon Hare.
Board has done it, previous boards have done it, to get to the point where we are spending nearly 80% of our general fund discretionary dollars and for the criminal justice system. So I think that was a poor choice of words. It was probably jointly that either the board adopted it and the officer or adopted it, but it's achieving this stable budget is much more accurate.
Mr. Chair, at our last budget meeting, our Sheriff Daniel said that next year, if we don't receive another renewal of the SRS extension, we'll be facing a fiscal cliff like no other, that we'll have to lay off all of our sheriff's patrols, and our jail will only serve Measure 11 inmates. I think that it's particularly important when we face that kind of budget crisis, that is exactly the kind of the time that budgeting for outcomes was designed to address. And because we'll be facing that next year,
so in the exercise of time,
oh, he's going to cut her off because they're out of time, you see. There's not time to talk about extending to another meeting because we're out of time this time. Thank you, Simon.
I'm not going to, we need to move forward on this. I completely agree that the conversation should have happened. But frankly, it isn't, you don't prepare for a cliff like we're going to experience this year. It needed to be done a decade ago, honestly. And now, adjusting 24% of the allocation of discretionary funds is not going to have, in my opinion, that trajectory of an outcome. So that's
now. It's hard to believe. I'm sorry. It's hard to believe that he really just said that. This is a budget committee. Please remember this that he just said. This is the budget committee that's supposed to be preparing us for this huge fiscal cliff that's coming next year that even the sheriff has warned us about. But as Simon says, that should have been done 10 years ago. So we can't really prepare now for what's coming up because it really just wouldn't make any difference. See, the only possible thing that's going to make any difference is for the citizens to do as they've been instructed and vote for more taxes. And if you don't do that, even the budget committee is not even going to consider this fiscal emergency, any kind of an emergency, because that's just not the answer that they want to hear. They can't possibly do it. What was it that he said again? Let's roll back just a little bit. Okay. Say it again, Simon.
I'd like to move that we schedule another meeting to hold that discussion.
Great. I would second that. It's been moved and seconded, open for discussion for a motion to have an additional budget meeting of this year's fiscal budget committee for Josephine County on the issue of budgeting for outcomes. Any other discussion? So my point on this has been that I think iterated by our budget officer that we have a stable budget. Budgeting for outcomes was done to produce the budget that we inherited this year when doing this budget. We've been doing it, like you said, for quite some time. I think the decisions that have been made have put us at a point where we're allocating 76% of the general funds where the discretionary elements of budgeting for outcomes would really come from. From my standpoint, until I'm forced to make some other kinds of decisions that are frankly going to be coming out of the criminal justice system, there isn't very much left in the discretionary portion of the budget for the discretionary funds that we have to do that budgeting for outcomes exercise. It's pretty time consuming, and we've done it several times already. So from my perspective, you may not have done it, but I have done it. This board has done it, previous boards have done it, to get to the point where we are spending nearly 80% of our general fund discretionary dollars and for the criminal justice system. So I think that was a poor choice of words. It was probably jointly that either the board adopted it and the officer or adopted it, but it's achieving this stable budget is much more accurate.
Mr. Chair, at our last budget meeting, our Sheriff Daniel said that next year, if we don't receive another renewal of the SRS extension, we'll be facing a fiscal cliff like no other, that we'll have to lay off all of our sheriff's patrols, and our jail will only serve Measure 11 inmates. I think that it's particularly important when we face that kind of budget crisis, that is exactly the kind of the time that budgeting for outcomes was designed to address. And because we'll be facing that next year,
So in the
that's why I think it's important that we
exercise of
do it
time,
next year.
I'm not going to, we need to move forward on this. I completely agree that the conversation should have happened. But frankly, it isn't, you don't prepare for a cliff like we're going to experience this year. It needed to be done a decade ago, honestly. And now adjusting 24% of the allocation of discretionary funds is not going to have, in my opinion, that trajectory of an outcome. So that's mine. I don't want to, we could belabor this. We've discussed this at length personally, but I think now it needs to be the budget committee wanting to entertain this or not for an additional meeting. So roll call vote, please.
Yes.
No.
No.
No? Yes.
No, motion fails 4-2. Item number 6 on our agenda is public comment. The opportunity to speak to the budget committee right now on the recommendation for the fiscal year 15-16 budget. You'll be given 3 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record. You don't have to give the specific street address, but your general locale. The gentleman in the hat first.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did I understand you to say fiscal year 15-16? Did you mean 16-17?
I meant 16-17.
Thank you.
They're all running.
Okay, so it's 2 hours into this budget committee meeting. They could potentially come back for one more, but they've already made up their mind. This rubber stamp is already made and stamped. And so now they're going to open it up for public comment. You'll have 3 minutes to discuss 2 hours of a meeting.
Together.
Bill Hill, Maryland. You know, this budget committee, finance committee, or whatever you guys are talking about, you, Mr. Heck, when you got elected the first few years ago, you agreed that you'd take half of your salary away, just like Bill Artell that agreed to donate it to charity. So when you say you only want to take 10,000, that's a drop in the bucket. I'd be more than happy to take half of your salary to live on. Like Ms. Goodman says, we didn't get no COLA raises for the last how many years. So what gives you guys and our commissioners, what gives you people the right to get 5%? Why don't you donate that to the sheriff department and maybe you hire another deputy or something? I mean, if you really live by the county charter, and I don't know how Steve Ritz, the legal counsel, and who was on the board at that time, corrupted the situation, because really you're supposed to be in the 30,000 range, all of you. And as far as, keeping good help around, like Ms. Walker says, well, you got 16 new people that's running for commissioner. And I'm sure either one of them can do just as good a job as either one of you. And you don't have to be a rocket science to be a commissioner, because you used to run the Gospel Rescue Mission, and I've known you for a long time, but when you signed that, went after that ordinance for junk all over the place, that's when I told you, me and you are not friends no more. So if you really want to do something, cut your salary in half. Then I say you're doing something. And that's my comment. And I'm against the 5% for anybody.
Ms. Ahrens?
Judy Ahrens, resident of Josephine County. It's pretty nice that we have a holidays. There's so many national holidays, and the employees, government employees, and including the teachers and public education educators and everybody that's involved in that. It's pretty cool that all these holidays during the year they get off. And what's interesting is that they can go to people who work all those days that they don't work. They can go to restaurants, they can go to entertainment, they can go to the movies, they can do all these neat things because, see, they're still working. They're in the private industry, and they know even a donut, when you want to get a donut in the morning or you want to go to the coffee place, coffee shops, they're all working, and they work real hard. And you just think of all of the holidays that the public employees get, and yet, we look at poor employees, poor me. I'm getting a little, I want to say irritated, disappointed that there's never enough, no COLAs for the last 6 or 7 years, but yet there's people in this community, next time you're downtown and you're strolling with your mate, check out all the stores and the businesses that have gone on building. Or if you like health stores, check out some of these neat health stores that are working really long hours. You have the privilege to go into them. And yet, we are concerned and worried about our public employees. I think they're great people. I sure love this one over here. She's my treat. Wendy, I'm just saying that I think there's never going to be enough money. Never. Even it's biblical. Enough is never enough. But yet in the private sector, some people work and they risk their monies, and then we all get to enjoy it. You're off all these holidays and you can go here. If a dental guy said, you know what, I'm not working, I'm giving up, where would you go for your dental work? Or in the private sector for the ice cream man, where would your grandkids go for that ice cream? They work long hours. Nobody ever gives them a year award or a 7-year PIN or a 2-year PIN or whatever. And yet, just think of all the privileges. I guess where I'm coming from, after hearing Margaret Goodwin, who's just my hero, she articulated everything so well, such a hero, that I feel like I live in a community and communities around our nation where we're just not appreciative, where there's just never enough for us. We always want some more. And yet, if an employee downtown wanted to come and go to the commissioner's, want to go to the commissioner's office for something, they're closed because they take off at noon. Yet, the people that only have that 1 hour, they're going to have to find some other time to do that. So there is a contrast between government workers, unfortunately, and the private sector who work real hard. And I'm sorry, so sorry you don't see that. Thank you
very much. Yes, Ms. Casanelli.
Sandy Casanelli, Merlin, Oregon. I have 3 topics to talk about today. First, Harold Hagen came to the first budget session and he made a recommendation that this board task or make a motion to have the Board of County Commissioners write a letter to the state saying that the DA would no longer be getting the supplemental budget that Josephine County gives him as of July 2017. So I would ask this board that they would consider that, make a motion, and do that. Second item I have is I'm very disappointed that you gave elected officials, according to the comparators, which are by population and not by the economic status of the counties, this money to elected officials. When I was in office in 2017, the commissioners made $70,000. They now make $75,000. They have been getting raises all along. So don't tell me that, they haven't had anything in 8 years, because they have. And the third thing that I would like to talk about is this road reserves money. In the budget goals, it says to provide access to the county services to citizens in Josephine County in a transparent, open, and efficient manner. I have been asking not for this data, which provides the ending fund balance for the combined roads and bridge reserve. what I asked for on April 26th budget session, at the May 4th weekly business session, at the May 11th weekly business session, and with a public information request on May 13th, is I want to know how much Title I SRS payments the county has received since HB 4175 was enacted. I still have not got that information. And this will tell more about what has happened to that money. Did it go to different accounts? Was everything put in that road reserve fund? Where was the Title I money distributed since 2012? Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, Mr. Adel.
Bill Earl, Williams, Oregon. I got a little confused on a couple of things tonight, so just wanted to see if we could clarify them. This discussion we had on compensation, it seems to me what we were trying to talk about was either the retention of these employees by increasing their salary, or recruiting future candidates for these positions. And I didn't hear that particular discussion. Seems to me in an enterprise, especially in human resources, those would be the two twin things that you'd try and figure out in terms of compensation. Is this a retention action that we're taking, or is it a recruitment? So I got lost there. I got lost on the discussion of reported versus unreported income in Josephine County. I think it's an interesting topic. It seems to me that we can't, for the enterprise, the county, talk or focus too much on unreported income, because unreported income by its nature would not generate any additional revenue in terms of taxes back to the county. So I was lost on that. And then I was also slightly disappointed on the economic development presentation. I was really hoping that we would see sort of a list of programs or people that we spent money on the past 12 months or 24 months, so you could kind of get a historical perspective of where economic development dollars went, and then you could draw some conclusions. So that's my comments. But overall, highly satisfied with the budget process. Thank you.
Okay, so Bill Ertl is highly satisfied with the budget process. Woohoo! I sat in on a meeting today, just a couple hours ago, where the money that's been going out the door to the Illinois Valley Community Development Organization, yes, the famous 90 jobs will be created by putting a plaque on a rock, people, where they got together with the SBDC, that's the Small Business Development Center, to talk with the commissioners about the relatively new revolving loan fund, where the commissioners have said, oh, we're not going to give out grants anymore, where they're picking winners and losers. We're now going to give out loans where they're picking winners and losers. And so they were asked, well, what's your rate? Are people paying on time? Well, no, not really, but we're pretty easy with them. Now, here's the main point, and I'm going to end on this. Who's getting the money? Because it would be nice to see a report. Well, the commissioners were given a report. We don't get to see the report. Are you kidding me? Because if they showed us the report, why, that would be transparency. And the three commissioners are sitting there, and with Arthur O'Hare, the finance director, they're not going to tell us what's going on with the money. We will not get a chance to track who's getting the money and are they paying it back and what are they spending it on, because that would be transparency. It might be nice, as Bill Ertl said, that they would discuss such a thing in a budget meeting, but they can't do that because it's just rubber stamp. They're not going to do that. I don't know, maybe the new commissioners will. Good luck to that idea. But the most important thing to me about that meeting today was that these two fellows, that's Kenny Hauk from the Small Business Development Center, from the Illinois Valley Community Development Organization, and also the fellow from Small Business Development Center, what they were saying was, well, we haven't really told many people about these loans and their availability. Wait a minute. You haven't told me? No, we don't really want to advertise. People are coming in because they've heard about it, I guess from their friends, or maybe we've told them. The people that we know, they're coming in and they're getting loans. Well, how many loans go out the door? Well, pretty much everybody that comes in and asks for something, we give it to them. Well, are you turning down anybody? Yeah, says Kenny Hauk. I'm personally saying to people, no, that's not going to happen. And it doesn't go to the loan board at all. Oh, that's nice. Kenny Hauk is personally deciding that they shouldn't even be considered by the loan board. And who are these people coming in? Only those. Do you remember the thing about the firewood back about a year ago? That, let's not tell everybody about the firewood that'd be available because it's just for the elite. This is the same problem that we've had from the beginning. It's just a slightly different flavor. So now it's not just outright gifts. It's low interest loans only given out to people, to their friends and the people that know about it. You're not going to tell everybody. What, are you crazy? And even Kenny Hauk said during this meeting today, well, don't get me started on that because that, we don't really want to publicize that. We don't want to publicize that this is available. This money that comes from the county and then goes to the IVCDO and then is loaned out to people. We don't want to tell people about that. Well, think of the repercussions if everybody knew that there would be an equal playing field. Others might be asking for this. People who don't know Kenny Hauk by name. People who are not friends of the commissioners might be standing in line. That's a possibility. So, Bill, continue to ask. Sandy Casanelli, continue to ask again and again and again, and put in a public information request. And what happens now, I already told you with the public information request, is they go to legal counsel. And then my experience has been, and I've asked for more of them than probably anybody else, is legal counsel said, well, you don't really want that. So we're not following the law. We're not playing fairly. We're not telling people that this money is potentially available. And we're not going to be giving any money to the sheriff because that would eliminate the problem or alleviate it anyway. So have a nice evening, everybody.